Jesus in verses 18 and 19 of Matthew 13 says, "Therefore hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is he who received seed by the wayside." Now the wayside, as we remember, has no soil. Pavement's pretty cold and hard. That's its purpose, right? You don't want pavement to be breaking, especially in the middle of winter. You may be skidding off into a ditch if that's the case. Well, so this is also witnessing to a person with no openness to Christ. You might say, well, Jesus changed my life. He gave me peace where I only had worry. He made me strong to be able to say what I believe and to not have to apologize for it. And somebody will say, oh, that was just your willpower that did that. You're a strong person. Or, I don't want to talk about that God stuff. It's just all a fairy tale. Well, don't argue with the person. They're just not open. What will probably happen is if you argue with them, you might win the point, but you're going to lose the match. The person will not want to talk about this ever with you again, right? I don't think I've ever won somebody to Christ through arguing. I have made points, and sometimes there are debates, and that can be healthy. Other people listening are able to get some points out of it. But if it's just you and someone else, that relationship may well be damaged. So don't get into a fruitless debate in more ways than one. And something to remember, too, is that we can be different soils at different times in our life. Like years ago, when I was 21 or 22, I was really pretty much would fall on the wayside. People would pray for me or they would witness to me, and I would just say, oh, it's kind of nice, and I wouldn't believe there was anything to it. I'd say, I really don't believe in anything that can't be tested and that's supernatural. Well, obviously that soil changed. God grew me, and that's putting those nutrients into that soil, isn't it? It's getting rid of those thorns and making sure that it's on good ground. So even if you don't see someone interested at one point, God may just open up a door later on. Just pray for them and draw them. I think a lot of times this is by the families, especially the mothers. They pray and pray and pray for their sons. I remember mentioning Jerry Falwell. He grew up, he was not a believer. I believe his mother made him go to church, but he never really gave his heart to the Lord. Well, he got into his teenage years, finally did. Ended up going to Baptist Bible College, Fundamental Baptist in Springfield, Missouri. He became ordained, and then he started, essentially, I guess he wouldn't start a church. They invited him to begin it in an old Donald Duck Cola factory. He said, our feet still stuck to the floor after all those years of that syrup being poured. And eventually, that church hit 22,000 members in a community of 80,000 people. Wow, that's something else. So he became good ground in time. Now, we go to verses 20 and 21 of Matthew 13. Our Lord says, but he who received the seed on stony places, this is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures only for a while. For when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, immediately he stumbles. Now remember, this is the seed on the shoulder of the road. And just as most of the wildlife you're going to see there is dead, we're going to have, unfortunately, the seed die eventually. Jesus says the person hears the gospel and seems to believe it. They get excited. Maybe the person prays to receive the Lord. Maybe he or she also comes to church for a month or so, watches on television as well. The problem is the person is rootless. He or she can't make that decision and really stand up against what the enemy is sending. That person is looking for the easy, wide path. Just like people sometimes today, when they're criticized, they'll go and flip-flop back to the folks who are criticizing them. That's not really a good policy, is it? You, of course, are weakened, and that which you didn't believe is strengthened. So it's better to tough it out. Most of the time, we do what somebody called awfulizing. We think about the worst-case scenario, which very, very rarely comes to pass. COVID's a good example. What we did is we locked down the whole country and told everybody to stay home for several weeks. Well, that pretty well killed our economy, which was really rolling. It didn't stop the COVID at all. Michigan locked down the tightest of all, and they have had some of the worst rate of cases all the way through. The problem is a virus doesn't just go away. The winds blow it here and there. We speak, it just keeps moving. So it's not going to go away. You can't just hide from a virus. It's going to be there. So sometimes we think, oh my gosh, if I witness to somebody, they're going to be horribly offended. They're going to tell me off, or I'll never see them again. If you're polite when you do it, and you take no for an answer, that's not going to happen the vast majority of the time. I think what sometimes happens is we think that we've got to get them saved, so we just keep arguing and arguing when it's really clear they're not going to budge, you know. God's not going to defeat our will and make us say yes when we really in our heart believe no. And if we said yes, it wouldn't count anyway, would it? You know, we have to speak out of the fullness of the heart. So we also need to take the example, too, that we need to stick with new believers. Perhaps we have someone who prays to receive the Lord here in our services or revival. Well, that person gets attacked by the enemy, right? Just like Jesus said a couple of verses ago, the devil's people, they take away, they try to take that seed away from them. So we have to keep pouring onto those people, invite them to come where we are, lunch or whatever activity. We also need to encourage them, follow up with them, give them a call or an email, stop by and visit them, because the devil is going to say nothing happened. There's really nothing to this. You're just the same old failure you've always been, and you're always going to be that way. And now you're going to lose all your friends. Well, you know, when friends start coming in from this new place, isn't that a reinforcement to stay on the path they've begun?